to today's virtual roundtable. My name is Claudia Cunyaerts. I am the director for the ILO Decent Work Team and Office for the Caribbean, based in Trinidad and Tobago, but currently stranded in Washington, DC. And I will be moderating the discussion today. This is the Caribbean chapter of a broader initiative in the ILO in the Americas, where we want to provide a space for dialogue among governments, workers, employers, and other stakeholders to discuss the socio-economic impact of the pandemic, how it affects the world of work, and of course, explore solutions. It's the first of our Caribbean COVID-19 webinar series that we will organize on a wide variety of specific themes directly related to work, the world of work, and COVID-19. It's going to be ranging from the role of SMEs to alternative work arrangements, unemployment protection, just to mention a few. These will be held on a bi-weekly basis, with the exception of the next one, which we're going to hold on the 28th of April next week, when we're celebrating World Day on Safety and Health. You will find more details of all of this on the ILO website. In the past few weeks, we also convened some more targeted discussions, webinars also, for workers, for employers, and for ministries of labor, respectively. But today is the first public event, and we are very pleased to see a large interest. We have over 300 registered participants. Before I introduce our distinguished panel and we get going on the discussion, I wanted to put forward a few ground rules to ensure that we have a successful meeting. First, after the panelists' presentations, we want to facilitate an interactive exchange and give the participants the opportunity to ask questions for our speakers. Please note, however, that you can only communicate through the chat section. Your mics have been disabled and it will not be possible to take the floor or share documents. We are doing this to keep our meeting secure and orderly. The panelists, you of course have all access to audio and video. You're however kindly requested to mute your mics when you're not speaking, just to make it easier for everybody listening in. Depending on the amount of questions that we get, we may have to cluster questions and we may not get your exact question explicitly addressed. However, we are committed to respond to the specific important questions and invite you to send remaining persistent questions to the ILO's email address. Otherwise, I will take the moderation and I will hand the questions to the distinguished panel. Of course, also the last thing just to say as a house rule, even though of course we hope it would not be needed and it's very unlikely, but should the meeting be hacked, we will close it immediately and would attempt to restart it. Without further ado, I'd like now to turn to my high-level panel. And I'm very pleased that we have among us two distinguished ministers who agreed to come and speak to us today. Firstly, Minister Jennifer Baptiste Primus, our Minister of Labor and Small Enterprise Development of Trinidad and Tobago. We're very pleased that you are with us, Minister, and I know you had some trouble getting there, but you did make it, so thank you so much. Our second minister with us.
Good morning.
Yes, our second minister is Honorable Minister Vance Amori, who is the Minister of the Ministry of Navies Affairs, Labor, Social Security, and Ecclesiastical Affairs in St. Kitts and Nevis. So very happy to have you with us as well, Minister. We also have two representatives, the voices of the workers and employers with us. So I'm very pleased to have Mr. Wayne Chang, President of the Caribbean Employers Confederation. Good morning, great to see you. And Mr. Andre Lewis, who is the President of the Caribbean Congress of Labor. Great to have you all with us. And then last but not least, I would like to introduce the ILO Regional Director for the Americas, recently joined, unfortunately, in the midst of the COVID crisis. So this is really the first opportunity that we have to introduce Mr. Vinicius Pinheiro, who was previously the special representative to the ILO in the United Nations, for the United Nations in New York. Great to have you with us, Vinicius. So this is the panel, and I would start with the Minister Vance Amori, for you to maybe talk to us a little bit more specifically about the measures that St. Kitts and Nevis has been taking in response to the crisis, and we understand even that I think today the disbursements are expected to start. So I think the audience would very much like to hear what St. Kitts and Nevis has been doing, what challenges you are encountering, and how you see the development of the current situation. If you could keep your remarks to 10 minutes for all the panelists, that would be great, because we would really like to make sure that the many participants who are with us have an opportunity to engage with us. I will mute my microphone now, and I will hand over to you, Honorable Minister, for you to speak. You can unmute your mic.
Can you hear me? You're hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Very good. Great to have you with us. And please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Director. And it's a pleasure and a great honor to have been asked to participate in this very important discussion at this time. The world of work in a time of COVID-19 is a critical opportunity for all of us, and especially myself and the government of St. Kitts and Nevis and the people of St. Kitts and Nevis, to look at the state of the world of work here in St. Kitts and Nevis. Now, let me say that St. Kitts and Nevis has been hard hit, primarily because our economy and the persons engaged in the world of work, it's a service economy, tourism oriented, with allied services, which provide support for the tourism industry primarily. There is some manufacturing which goes on, and we have been quite buoyant in that area. However, all of those areas, except for one hotel which does mostly local work, all of the hotels have been affected. It means that a significant number of our workers in St. Kitts and Nevis have been, one, either temporarily laid off and therefore have no income, or some have had to be given reduced hours, reducing their earnings. And we have also the self-employed who fall in a number of categories, where we are looking primarily at taxi drivers. We're looking at persons who provide support for the tourism industry. So you will see that from that they clearly are affected. Now, when we recognize that we would have to close the borders and therefore bring economic activity and movement to a halt, the Ministry of Labor engaged our tripartite partners, the representative of employers and the representative of workers, the trades union, the teachers union, manufacturers association, to discuss with them how do we deal with this unprecedented event in our history. And in that discussion, we looked at how we could, in fact, help and work together in partnership to keep our workers at least not engage in any drastic action. But it soon became evident that workers had to be laid off. It became evident as well that except for those workers who would be needed to keep properties in the hotel industry and other areas in a shape so that they do not deteriorate, that there will be reduced hours and reduced earnings. And the self-employed, clearly, the numbers were beyond the comprehension at that time. By the 25th of March, we recognized that we had, after discussions with Cabinet, we had to provide a stimulus package. And in conjunction with Social Security, the government decided that Social Security would make a payment to anyone affected by the COVID pandemic of $1,000 if they lose all of their earnings. We would provide, if they receive partial earnings, we will make the difference between what they earn and the $1,000. So if someone earned $400 in that, and this is a monthly stipend or monthly income substitution, if they earn $400, then the Social Security would provide $600 to bring the amount of that they can have to provide for themselves to $1,000. This came from a fund which was established by Social Security called a COVID Emergency Fund of $15 million to help in that situation so that our workers clearly had some earnings to buy food and other things. The self-employed, because they are directly engaged with the Social Security, they would go to Social Security, and Social Security, which is part of my responsibility, agreed that they would also seek, when they do the investigation as to whether someone has been earning or whether it's reduced earnings or they lost all of their earnings, would make the same allowance to such persons. Now, we have the issue with the informal sector. Now, that has always been a challenge. How do we deal with the informal sector? Now, to deal with the informal sector and persons who do not fall within the ambit of being employed at the time, but who sellers on the sidewalks or in the marketplace and so on. The government itself has what has been established as a poverty alleviation program, from which a specific amount is paid to persons whose household income falls below $3,000 per month. And that amount amounts to $500 per month to help with food, medicines, or whatever to tide persons over until they could increase their earnings. There's also from the government a social assistance program administered through the Ministry of Social Development and Community Affairs. And that seeks to provide assistance in food so that persons could at least, if the demand or if the need is there, they will get that assistance. Now, we also worked, as I said, with our tripartite partners. And in working with them, recognizing the issues that they too would be affected, we thought that the government would provide some relief through a reduction in corporate taxes. Social Security itself has decided, through the instrumentality of myself as minister, to defer the payment of contributions which are due, because we recognize that these businesses, these employers will be having a more stringent time. So we are helping to defer the payments so that they don't have to pay at this time. Now, all of these efforts at stimulus, we are looking at in the first 3 months. Now, we recognize we do not know how long this state of affairs, this reduced economic activity will go on at the rate or in the state or the level at which it is now existing. However, we recognize that we cannot see a return to a normal state of economic activity in anything under another year. So we're looking at 3 months, and I believe, having discussed with the Prime Minister and Cabinet, that we may have to continue to provide that stimulus from Social Security and from the Poverty Alleviation Program and from the community assistance for another 3 months after that, to keep our people from a state of abject poverty, but to make sure that they can look after themselves and their families. So we recognize that we have a very difficult task ahead of us. And although we've tried to get some of our businesses to continue to operate with reduced earnings in the entire economy, I think the only persons who will not be directly affected at this time would be public servants, who will continue to receive, and other government employees in parastatals, they will continue to receive their salaries and wages. But we know that generally we have a very rough time ahead of us, because we do not know when the tourism industry will be reinstated. The cruise industry has been closed, our ports are closed, and this is the story throughout the region and throughout the world. So we know we do have a difficult time. What we are trying to do is to try to encourage some of our young enterprising persons to establish IT businesses using the technology, working from their homes. Can they provide services to deliver stuff? Can they provide new avenues of employment to at least earn some? But if in the general scheme of things, panelists and those who are listening to us, there is a downturn, loss of significant revenue to government, loss of commercial activity to the other business enterprises, clearly a close down of the tourism industry. And incidentally, the slow period would have started at this time in the year. So for the next 6 months, were things normal, we would be having a difficult time because the tourism industry would be at its lowest. So we're looking at another year, maybe 15 to 18 months before we can see a return. Meanwhile, we are saying to our employees who have been affected, the amount which has been allocated for income assistance should be managed very carefully. One of the bright spots for us is that this last tourism industry has been has been one of very high earnings. So some may have had some savings, but we're not looking at their savings. We're looking at whether or not they have been laid off, whether or not they have reduced earnings, or whether they are self-employed who have suffered as a result of this COVID-19. And this is where we are helping to make all people try to make some comfort, make a buffer until such times as we return to a state of normality. It is not easy. The challenge is going to be great. And I think it's not just for St. Kitts and Nevis, but I'm sure other countries throughout the region and the world will have similar, if not more difficult challenges as we have. I said, our external dependence on tourism makes it even more difficult for us to recover in the short period. I don't know if I've done 10 minutes. I wasn't chiming in.
Yes, you have done exactly 10 minutes, Honorable Minister. Thank you so much. And yes, I think you really already alluded to the enormous impact, and especially the fact that in the Caribbean islands, it's very likely to, unfortunately be running for a longer time, given the extremely high dependence of our countries on the tourism sector. Thank you so much. I'm sure that questions will be coming, and I will be returning to you, Minister. I will now turn to Minister Jennifer Baptiste Primus for your interventions. Once again, great to have you with us, and I'm handing over to you. This is our Minister from Minister of Labor and Small Enterprise Development of Trinidad and Tobago. Over to you, Minister.
Thank you very much, Claudia, and it is indeed a pleasure to see you and a pleasure to be here. The Honorable Vance Amory, Minister of Nevis Affairs, Labor, Social Security and Ecclesiastical Affairs in Kitts and Nevis. Mr. Wayne Chen, President of the Caribbean Employers Confederation. Mr. Andre Lewis, President of the Caribbean Congress of Labor. Mr. Vinicius Cavallo Pinero, Director, ILO Regional Office for Latin America and the Caribbean. Ms. Claudia Coinarts, Director, ILO Decent Work Team and Office for the Caribbean. All other participating officials, a blessed good morning. It is indeed my pleasure to participate in this virtual roundtable and to share with you information on the measures being implemented by our government, the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. On behalf of my government, the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, I wish to extend solidarity to our regional, Latin American, and international neighbors during this unprecedented crisis. I also wish to thank the ILO for organizing this very important discussion through which we can exchange experiences, thereby learning from each other. We are currently facing a global health crisis. It has been reported that this crisis began in December 2019, when a cluster of pneumonia cases were detected in Wuhan, China. These cases spread, and on 30th January 2020, the World Health Organization declared a public emergency of international concern. The number of cases continued to increase rapidly, leading the WHO to declare a global pandemic on the 11th of March 2020. The health impacts have been very severe, and as reflected by global statistics on the number of cases and deaths that have occurred throughout the world. In Trinidad and Tobago, the first case was confirmed on the 12th of March 2020, and to date, we have had 114 cases, regrettably 8 deaths, and 21 persons have since recovered. As the health crisis deepens, in addition to these health impacts, there have also been severe socio-economic impacts, which require socio-economic responses. Governments across the globe have implemented a series of socio-economic measures to protect economic activity, jobs, and income. According to the International Labour Organization, the response to COVID-19 crisis should be built upon the following 4 pillars. 1, stimulating the economy and employment. 2, supporting enterprise. 3, jobs and incomes. 4, protecting workers in the workplace and relying on social dialogue for solution. My friends, to date, Trinidad and Tobago has implemented a range of support measures in line with these 4 pillars. With respect to pillar 1, stimulating the economy and employment, the following measures were announced to the citizenry of Trinidad and Tobago on the 18th of March. 1, reduce reserve requirement and repo rate, which would increase available liquidity and decrease the prime lending rates. 2, further decrease the lending rates to 6%. 3, decrease interest rates for credit card payments, that is by between 10% and 17%. 4, 1-month moratorium for loan payments. 5, moratoriums to also be offered by the following state agencies: the Trinidad and Tobago Mortgage Finance Company and the Housing Development Corporation. 6, major non-bank lending agencies to reduce interest rates and offer moratoriums. 7, major private sector groups such as the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturing Association and the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Industry and Commerce, to encourage their member companies not to reduce their staff complements. 8, payments to businesses such as tax refunds to be accelerated by the government. 9, liquidity support program valued at Trinidad and Tobago dollars 100 million to be administered through credit unions. 10, increased allocation of foreign exchange, in particular for businesses trading in essential goods, foods, and pharmaceuticals. 11, 50 million TT to be made available through a grant facility to hoteliers. And our Ministry of Finance has lead responsibility for implementing these measures. Additionally, a series of social measures geared towards supporting enterprise, jobs, and income consistent with Pillar 2 are being implemented. These measures were announced on the 23rd of March, and some of them include: 1, a salary relief grant, through which persons who have suffered involuntary termination of employment, suspension, or loss of income as a result of the COVID-19 crisis and are registered with our National Insurance Board of Trinidad and Tobago, they are eligible for a grant of up to $1,500 for a 3-month period. That is $1,500 every month for a 3-month period. This is being implemented by the Ministry of Finance and administered by the National Insurance Board of Trinidad and Tobago. This measure is targeted towards persons who were employed in sectors particularly hard hit by the impacts of COVID-19, such as the hotel and entertainment industries, including bars, casinos, restaurants, and nightclubs. Secondly, social support measures, namely social assistance grants, comprise of public assistance, rental assistance, and temporary food card. These grants are valued at $150 to $500 depending on the size of the family, and TT $2,500 per month and $510 per month respectively. That's for the temporary food card. Individuals or a member of their family who has been retrenched, terminated, or experienced reduced income on or after the 1st of March 2020, and where the reduced gross income, that is minus any statutory deductions of the family, does not exceed $10,000, they are eligible to access these grants. These social support measures were announced on the 23rd of March and are being made available through the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services in collaboration with our ministry, the Ministry of Labor and Small Enterprise Development. Additionally, the following are being implemented in order to protect workers in the workplace as articulated by Pillar 3. 1, strengthen occupational safety and health measures, and that means our Occupational Safety and Health Agency produced COVID-19 guidelines for employers and businesses in March of 2020. Secondly, adapt work arrangements, that is teleworking. A stay-at-home order was announced requiring only workers in essential sectors to report to their job site during the period 30th of March to 15th of April 2020. This was extended until the 30th of April 2020. This measure was given effect through Regulation number 7 and number 8 of 2020 under Section 105 of our Public Health Order. The sectors recognized as essential are listed in these regulations. Alternative working arrangements are currently in place for workers who are deemed non-essential sectors. That is, they're teleworking or working from home. 3, the ministry did draft national policy guidelines on preparing workplaces in Trinidad and Tobago for COVID-19 were developed by a cabinet-appointed committee that I chaired with the assistance of the Chief Personnel Officer and our highly efficient professional technical staff here at the Ministry of Labor and Small Enterprise Development to guide the public and state sectors as well as employers and employees in the private sector who, in responding to COVID-19 at the workplace, These guidelines are still before the Cabinet for approval. As a matter of fact, Cabinet sent those guidelines to the Finance and General Purposes Committee, and that committee, we are having a virtual meeting at the end of this meeting, within half an hour of this meeting ending, where the guidelines will be finally signed off, hopefully. Pillar 4 recognizes the importance of developing the policy measures required through social dialogue. In Trinidad and Tobago, the social partners were consulted on responses measures such as the workplace guidelines through what we have in place that is called the National Tripartite Advisory Council, which includes representatives of government, business, and labor. The Ministry of Finance has indicated that the total value of support measures being implemented by our country is estimated at $2 billion TT. Funding sources for these interventions include international financial institutions such as the IDB, the IMF, and World Bank, and our local sovereign wealth fund, the Heritage Stabilization Fund. To date, more than 75,600 individuals and families have benefited from these measures implemented by our Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. Additionally, the total expenditure to date on the social support measures exceed 46 million TT dollars. The implementation of response measures has not really been free from challenges. Some of the challenges that we have faced in implementing these socio-economic responses include ensuring the disbursement of benefits to affected persons in a timely and accountable manner. 2, facilitating persons while at the same time maintaining social distancing. Online application forms are available, but other mechanisms had to be established, such as distributing forms through our local police stations to ensure that persons without internet access could obtain these vital forms without having to line up to collect them. 3, ensuring that there are also measures to support businesses and workers in the informal economy. My friends, additionally, other challenges which we have experienced in the COVID-19 response are: 1, the evolving changes in work design and the conditions under which work is performed to ensure decent work opportunities, and the need for the development and/or amendment of policies and legislation to support the evolving work environment consistent with the ILO standards. For example, new classifications of leave, revised occupational safety and health standards. Given that the socioeconomic impacts are likely to have lasting impacts, it is important that corresponding measures are developed for the short, medium, and long term. In this regard, a 22-member committee under the chairmanship of our Honorable Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, was established with the mandate to develop a post-COVID-19 roadmap for Trinidad and Tobago's economy. This committee is comprised of representatives from several sectors, including business, finance, academia, social organization, civil society, and labor. Ladies and gentlemen, this health crisis has forced us to accept artificial intelligence, to embrace it a little quicker than we may have had under normal circumstances, and the technology as elements of our daily lives. In the face of the current pandemic, the use of online platforms such as Skype, Zoom, Microsoft Teams have increased very rapidly as people the world over use these platforms for meetings, just as we are doing here today, and also for classes. Undoubtedly, The world of work has been disrupted by the current health crisis. These disruptions include mandatory use of alternative working arrangements, that is, teleworking, staff rotation, salary cuts, and layoffs. Going forward, it would be important to promote the development of policy measures to protect against major disruption, such as business continuity plans. Therefore, it is critical that for the future, robust and holistic labor-related policies, which are based on the decent work agenda, are implemented in order that our labor markets would be more resilient in the face of future crises, and that people's livelihoods are protected as much as possible. Such policies should seek to institutionalize strong social protection measures, such as leave benefits and income support. Our partners at the ILO could play a key role in this regard. In closing, ladies and gentlemen, friends, I would like to recall the words of the ILO Director General, Guy Ryder, in relation to the current pandemic. And I quote, "All aspects of our future will be affected: economic, social, and developmental. Our response must be urgent, coordinated, and on a global scale, and should immediately develop help to those most in need." I thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share Trinidad and Tobago experience with our Caribbean counterparts and our listening audience. Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for a very nice and comprehensive overview of the response in Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm sure that, as we move on with the discussion later on, there will be, more specific follow-up questions coming from our audience. Thank you again. I will now move on to our workers and employers representatives. So may I maybe invite Mr. Wayne Chang, the President for the Caribbean Employers Confederation. I know you're going to make a presentation. May I just ask you that when you want us to move the slides, please just mention it, because so that the colleagues who are managing that process can do so. Over to you, Wayne. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I lost my internet and I was connecting from my phone earlier. So I have had to be very agile. Let me just turn the phone off. There we go. Well, we can go to the second slide right away. The fact is that the policy measures that we have seen through the region have essentially been to mitigate the immediate fallout caused by the COVID crisis. Primarily, these have taken the form of direct cash grants to the workers who have been displaced, people who have been displaced, vulnerable communities. We have seen loan measures to small businesses in particular, in sectors that have been dislocated. And it's no secret that much of the Caribbean relies on tourism. In some countries, roughly around 90% of the economy is directly linked to tourism-based activities. So there have been measures to mitigate any job losses, short-term loans, cash grants to the small hotels. I'm not aware of any cash grants to the bigger chain hotels, but certainly the workers have been taken into account. So in a general sense, the policy measures thus far have been mitigating policy measures. And these will have severe impacts because they're expensive. They will have to be sustained for quite a period of time until economic activity starts to normalize. It will mean a slip in countries that have been overcoming their fiscal and debt issues. So they will have longer term impacts. Next slide, please. In terms of the membership, the employers through the region, to use an earlier analogy, the war is still going on. and many businesses are in survival mode. Many employers through the region right now have zero cash flow, zero revenue. Many are facing a very uncertain future because they have fixed expenses, bank loans, wages, utilities, even at the very lowest level, security costs to secure their properties and businesses. So many are seeing zero or much reduced revenue. So the focus right now is on survival. And the national employers organizations have been really engaged in a lot of hand-holding. And I want to add that when our members have zero revenue, we in turn have very little revenue because paying dues to membership associations is not very high on the list of priorities at this time. So all of us, I will be frank and blunt in saying, are currently in survival mode. Next slide, please. And of course, the next step, and I just came out of a meeting before this one with the Prime Minister of Jamaica and a small group of us talking about what are we going to be doing post-COVID. Right now, everything is about the epidemic. In some countries, we are still going up the curve. In some countries, we are at the top of the curve. But the fact of the matter is that for the next few weeks, I know that Trinidad has had 4 straight days or 5 straight days now without a single new confirmed case. It's a similar situation in Barbados. So we are optimistic that some countries have now plateaued and will now be managing the downward side of the curve, which, based on the examples of other countries, still seems to be a 4 to 8 week process before we can declare the countries COVID-free and start to resume some normal movement, start to pick up. But the sobering thought is that our economies are vulnerable and inextricably linked with the fortunes of North America and Europe. So we can only move as fast as our trading partners and our economic partners. So we are looking forward to a resumption to some sort of rough normalcy, but that seems to be at least a month or 2 away in the most optimistic projections. The big challenge facing the majority of Caribbean countries is something that we have talked about in these fora for a very long time, and that is the over-reliance of our economies on single areas of economic activity. Tourism, when you go across the region, and if you were to go, starting in the Bahamas, going back down to St. Kitts Nevis, hello Minister, you know of what I speak, Antigua, Barbuda, going down the islands. Tourism is the big part of the economy and the related services. And nobody can say with any certainty, no expert in North America or Europe or traditional markets can say with any certainty when we will start to see the numbers and the level of economic activity resume to what we have been accustomed to. In the interim, people have to eat, bank loans have to be paid, businesses are struggling. So there are no doubt huge challenges ahead of us that will have to be taken aboard. There was a very sobering statement from the head of the IMF a few days ago when she said that the dire projections of economic activity worldwide may be too optimistic. So I don't know if dire is optimistic, I don't know what other superlative we can now use to say where our economies will be in the coming months. But there's no doubt in my mind that many of the economies will not only see decline, some will see double-digit decline at a scale that we have never seen in our lifetimes. Only Guyana seems to be showing some positive movement, largely based on the prospect of oil. But there is another sobering side that oil fell to a record low in the last few days. And if there is a glut on the world market, the expected revenues for Guyana cannot be seen as a sure bet. So every single country within CARICOM is facing very serious challenges in the coming months and years. Next slide, please. But in all the doom and gloom, there are opportunities. A few weeks ago, somebody said, because many of us, not all, are heavily dependent on petrocarbon imports. If you want to find some diamonds in the mud, at least our oil bills will go down in some countries. But I'm looking, and we are looking, and the groups I'm participating in are certainly looking for opportunities within the crisis. There are things that we have spoken about as inhibitors to economic development and social development that we can now start to think about at least. We are here utilizing online technology to hold a meeting. School is out. Many of the region's students are at home utilizing online classes, some to a greater degree than others. Some are just getting the exercises in the morning and handing them back in the evening. Some are getting live tutorials from the same teachers that were in the classroom. We had a meeting recently with the Caribbean Examinations Council, and they say they have seen an uptick in the use of their own online platform where many of the lessons and curricula are already stored. Right now we're in discussion as to what is going to be happening this year for the CSEC and CAPE exams, which 100,000 plus students sit on an annual basis in CARICOM. And there has not been a regional consensus on what is going to be an acceptable qualification that will allow some to graduate, some to move on to tertiary training, some to enter the world of work. But there are challenges, but there are also opportunities now to how to make this a permanent and growing part of the delivery of education. There's an opportunity now that people are at home to upskill the workforce while we are focused on the welfare payments to ensure that people have food on the table and they can keep the light and internet on. People should not just be sitting idle. Governments should now focus on using this opportunity to say, what are the skills that
Did we lose Mr. Chen?
yeah.
Yes, I think the audio is lost. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
We can hear me. So we could not hear Mr. Chen. I know he was still completing his presentation. Mr. Chen, we cannot hear you right now. I will ask my IT colleagues to be in contact with you, and meanwhile, I will, in the interest of time, I will move on to the presentation by Mr. Andre Lewis, the President of the Caribbean Congress of Labor, and we can come back to you, Mr. Chen, after that.
Sorry, I lost you for a minute. I hope you can hear
okay,
me.
sorry. All right, sorry about that. I can see you're back now. So Mr. Lewis, just be patient for a little longer. We let you finish. I was not sure if we were going to get you back so easily. Back to you, Mr. Chen.
Yes, sorry, I'm back. I lost my internet for a little while here. So next, are you hearing?
Yes, we are hearing now, but it was breaking up. Why don't you try again? So you asked for the next slide?
Next slide, yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh yes, and of course the famous saying that don't let this good crisis go to waste should be in our minds, because as we sit in a crisis mode, we should be, as I said earlier, looking at what opportunities are there to emerge post-COVID different and better than we were before. I'm seeing, to sum up, upskilling our workforces to grasp opportunities in the new economy. I see the opportunities for community strengthening, as I say, as welfare payments are going out to dispossessed workers and families. I see a part of the skill training being applying these skills in your own community. The landscaping, the cleaning up, the creation of community gardens, things to bring communities back together, because we have long known that building strong communities is one of the key ingredients in sustainability, in reduction of crime and violence, and in many other initiatives that run in parallel to going to work and coming back home and the economic imperatives. Can I get the next slide, please? The emphasis again has to be on economic resilience. It's something we have talked about with the ILO as a grouping of Caribbean labor ministers, as representatives of employers and workers. We have talked about diversifying the economy and the resilience. We saw the issue of the hurricanes, successive hurricanes, and impact on our members. And one of the things that we have long agreed to is taking advantage of opportunities in the knowledge economy. Global services will continue to grow. The challenge has always been moving up the value chain from just creating call centers in the Caribbean. We're talking about the creative industries. We are talking about accessing the global economy online and training our young people to take advantage of these opportunities. This period where we are not doing anything, sitting idle because of the downturn in hospitality, is an opportune time to look back again at how do we spend the next 6 months to a year adding to the basket of skills that our people currently have. And one more slide. Next slide, please. We can take a cautious approach. We can take an approach. My feeling is that we need to jump ahead of events. It will mean, in the vast majority of instances, that governments will have to spend some money up front. It will mean an increase in the short term of debt. We have a way, we can do this in several ways. We can either dole out money on a weekly basis to keep people alive, or we can accept that this crisis may well cost us 10 to 20% of our gross domestic product, and spend some money up front to put in place the measures and infrastructure so that the time does not end with us having eaten the money and being no better off than we were at the beginning of the crisis. So our push is for a bold approach in terms of the fiscal side. Let us spend now to do the things that we have long talked about, but have never found the will or the focus to implement. One more slide, please. The final word we want to say is how critical social dialogue will become for any initiative. The initiatives that we are currently engaged in to mitigate the epidemic, and the initiatives that we will have to embark on to rebuild our economies after the epidemic has passed. It will be critical, and I use the word reset very specifically and pointedly, because I believe this is an opportunity for all of us to reset our economies and societies. We cannot allow the crisis to go to waste. We cannot spend money just on welfare measures and not use the time and the resources to also retrain and revitalize our workforces, to diversify our economies, and to focus on the sustainability and growth for the future. I rest here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this presentation, Mr. Chen. And I think it's also really great to, to sort of hear some of the points you're making with regard to let us think how we use use this to do the things that we have known we needed to do. I'm sure that there will be more comments and questions on that, but thank you very much. I will now pass on the floor, the mic to Andre Lewis, President of the Caribbean Congress of Labor. Andrew, the floor is yours. And Andrew, sorry, Andre, I think you are muted still. Can you unmute your mic? We are not hearing.
Okay.
All right, we're good now. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Yes, let me say good day to all the panelists, the listeners, and to thank the ILO for this very important and timely meeting. The Caribbean Congress of Labor, the voice of labor for the Caribbean, is speaking on the behalf of all the workers of the Caribbean region, be they unionized or ununionized, employed or unemployed. CCL salutes all workers who are on the battlefield in the fight against this deadly invisible enemy, COVID-19. We especially pay tribute to and salute the workers who many in society have traditionally looked down upon. Our sanitation workers, our hospital maids, cooks, and orderlies, our stevedores, our grocery workers, and other unsung heroes of the working class. Do you know what most of the above have in common? Unfortunately, most of them are amongst the lowest paid workers. They have been the least appreciated workers. They live under some of the most strained conditions, particularly as many of them form part of contractual labor. COVID-19 pandemic is wreaking havoc on mankind. It has the potential to permanently change the world as we know it, and therein lies our opportunity in the midst of this unprecedented crisis. It is an opportunity to be better and to do better. COVID-19 present redefining and protecting the essential worker, health and safety, and job security. Workers all over the world, and the Caribbean is no exception, have shown that they are selfless and committed. The Caribbean Congress of Labor recognizes and accepts that this is a period, a major challenge for all of us, be it government, business, and labor. We are presented with two major tasks. One, treating with the immediate threat that is with us, and two, preparing for the new world when the threat has been contained. It is a view of the CCL that there are some truths which we must face head on. We all know that this is not business as usual. This is indisputable. We must collaborate as a region to ensure that as many of us as possible survive COVID-19. It will do us little good to plan for the future if our response to the present compromises our ability to embrace all the possibilities of that future. Upon reflection on our current situation, as we as a region deal with COVID-19, it exposes the shortfalls that many Caribbean workers have been facing. It also shows how these workers continue to be exposed and lack social protection. Many of them do not have proper health care. Many of them live from hand to mouth. Many of them cannot afford a mortgage to build a decent home. Many of them cannot afford to give their children a proper meal. Many of them cannot afford to take a vacation away from home. It is this very set contract workers whom governments and some employers refuse to have on the permanent workforce while being employed for countless years that are presently carrying the brunt of this fight in many of our countries. And yet, they are the ones who have answered the call and step up to the plate. While most of us are at home, they have faced the invisible deadly enemy head on. Most of these workers continue to face this deadly threat without proper protective equipment. This crisis has shown that if people were properly paid with a decent living wage, the society would be in a better position today to face the socio-economic challenges. There would be less strain on governments and businesses in this period. Less workers would be dependent on stimulus packages. They would have had some sort of savings. Let us look at government duty of care and responsibility. We have seen a mixed reaction from our country governments in the region. We commend a few, such as Barbados and the Bahamas. I know I've heard of St. Kitts and Trinidad, that has involved the social partners from the onset to find a collective approach to this crisis. However, the evidence shows that many Caribbean countries did not want the involvement of the trade unions / labor movement. Unfortunately, they made decisions affecting the labor movement without the involvement of the labor movement. Many countries did not involve the labor movement even in discussions regarding industrial relations issues or issues pertaining to the health and safety of affected workers. In some of our islands, we have seen government responding with stimulus packages. In most countries, the labor movement has not been involved in the policy discussions regarding the dispensing of the package. The Caribbean Congress of Labor holds the view that our countries must utilize all non-essential finances towards the fight against this pandemic for health and income wages for workers. The CCL calls for a moratorium on all mortgages and loans for workers. The CCL calls for the provision of counseling services for workers impacted by COVID-19 follows. This is not a time for business to be driven by the profit motive. Put people and health before profit and wealth. We must ensure that any assistance which is received from the regional and international communities reach those to whom it is intended. There must be accountability, and with the involvement of the social partners, its proper intended use will be ensured. COVID-19 presents social and economic protection, the stigma of COVID-19, and the elimination of all forms of violence, discrimination, and victimization. We know that during this period, many of our Caribbean people are facing challenges and believe that the best way to deal with them is through violence. The CCL demands an end to all forms of violence. This period must not be used to prey on the poor and marginalized. We call for zero tolerance on sexual abuse, sexual harassment, child abuse, and domestic violence. We must ensure that there are policies and legislations to protect workers who are exposed from discrimination and unfair treatment arising from COVID-19. We call upon all workers to be responsible. We call upon all workers to do everything possible to help protect their jobs and their livelihood. Separation of services should not be the first option. There are alternative avenues to ensure business continuity. It is challenging to accept that businesses that declares millions in profits are quick to unilaterally alter salaries within the first few weeks of the pandemic. Let us now look at COVID-19, our key industries, tourism, fisheries, and agriculture. The Caribbean Congress of Labor recognizes and accepts that this period is a major challenge for all of us. Tourism is under a serious threat. We must now immediately begin the process of remodeling our economies. The Caribbean region must seriously develop its agricultural base to be able to feed the people of the region. Here, the aspect of transportation and construction comes in. While at this time, a regional transport ferry, due to the aspect of physical distances, will impact the movement of people, it can be used to transport cargo. We must focus on agro-processing to do value added to our products. We need to consume more of our local fish. These areas, with proper research, development, and implementation in each Caribbean country, would assist with the circulation of money and the creation of jobs. Planning the COVID-19, the COVID future. This period, despite the crisis and deaths, has given an opportunity to chart and start a new beginning, a way forward that will put people before profit, a way that will put health before wealth, an economic model that is community-based, driven, a society that has a basic income guarantee for all. In other words, there must be a minimum social protection for our societies. We must work to protect our food supplies and agricultural sectors. Self-sufficiency in the present and future is of paramount importance, especially when our borders need to be closed. It is very evident that there will be more pandemics in the future as mankind continue to encroach on the habitat of the wild animals. The issue of the transmission of virus from animals to man will continue. To all our Caribbean countries, our respective trade unions stand committed to being involved in the discussions regarding the fight against COVID. and the protection of workers, including its implications for workers and the wider society. Our concerns about the lack of genuine consultation. The Caribbean Congress of Labour notes with concerns that quite a number of our tripartite meetings have ended with little or no tangible follow-throughs. We see this meeting of today, Monday, April 20th, 2020, to be a new beginning. We expect that, working together with the ILO, we will be able to advocate for the meaningful changes as we combat COVID-19 now and deal with the potential realities after COVID-19. Colleagues, we give our commitment to work together, and we want to emphasize once again about the absolute need and importance of the social dialogue as we confront the challenges, both present and those to come. Thank you very much.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis, for your very thoughtful contributions, and I believe that they contribute very much to the debate, and you made some very, very important point about things we need to be looking at, and especially in light of the importance of social dialogue, and how do we maintain and strengthen that. I would now like to give the floor to our last speaker, our regional director, Mr. Vinicius Pinheiro, and you've had the opportunity to hear the inputs from all the other speakers from the Caribbean, from the different stakeholders. So it would be really great to hear a little bit from you, your reactions to this, as well, of course, as you know, where the ILO, what the key ILO messages are in the context of the pandemic and the socio-economic impact. Over to you, Mr. Pinheiro.
Thank you so much for inviting me for this virtual dialogue table. And thank you so much, honorable ministers and representatives of workers and employers. I have asked a last minute change in the program because Claudia had kindly asked me to speak first, and I said, now I'm the new in town, so I would like to speak last after listening to what my constituents they have to say. And it's kind of unfortunately that we are meeting under these circumstances, because I would love, of course, to greet all of you, either in your countries or in the International Labour Conference or in the governing body. But here we are at this virtual roundtable, and I think this is a great initiative, because one of the issues that is precisely missing in this entire process is that since we are all confined in our homes or in our places, in our countries, there's a lack of spaces, of public spaces for dialogue. And this is the ILO is the house of social dialogue. Without that, at the minimum, we should at least create this virtual spaces for discussing among us, among regions and among countries and among stakeholders what we're doing, and also within each country. You know? So as Claudia said, there is a track of regional and sub-regional dialogues, but also we expect that each country will organize its own roundtable. And let me start by saluting and paying a tribute to Ministers of Labour and to also our representatives of workers and employers, which are in the forefront of this war. Basically, Ministers of Labour now are like essential workers, are like health workers or security forces. And we have been talking to a number of ministers all over the places. And the first dialogue was included the Minister of Labour of Peru, and she was also making time to be with us in between meetings and emergency talks and conversations and negotiations with social partners. And but it shows that we are more relevant than ever, because the same decree that closed borders, shut down streets and business and lock down cities is also the decree that says, okay, we should provide an income to those who are not able to make it. We should provide some support to small and micro enterprises. Life has to continue. The economy the machinery has to continue, because people still need to live and to eat and have necessities, and we have to provide for that. And that's where the Ministers of Labor and the social partners, they have come very strongly, in some cases less, and have been following really closely all the measures taken in the region, in the Americas. And to some extent, some countries have championed social dialogue, others, maybe because of the emergency and the lack of time or appetite for negotiations, they just issue measures without consultation. But this is going to be a long battle, as the Minister Jennifer Baptiste said. This is going to be something that we'll be living with it for perhaps a year or two, and Minister Amory also reiterated that. So if we haven't engaged in social dialogue yet, there's still time, because this is going to be a long battle. And I said, and also it's fundamental to pay tribute to our heroes, which are the workers, as Mr. Andrew Liu said, who are in the forefront. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to compare that with the war. No? So we are in a war. Many leaders have highlighted that, against an invisible enemy. And now our soldiers are precisely the health workers, the ministers of labor, the social partners, and we need to recognize that, and we need to pay tribute to them, okay? And since we are in wartime, we need, with unprecedented time, we need also unprecedented measures. Our Director General, he highlighted this, the worst depression since the Second World War. And let's not forget that after the Second World War, they had a number of, we have the establishment of the welfare states, for example, in some countries. We have the phase out of the colonization process in the geopolitics of the world. So a number of changes. Well, we are on the tipping points that a lot of things can happen, for good or for bad. And what happens depends a lot on what we do and how we position ourselves and what we want to move forward. Of course, from the ILO, in the outset, we have provided you with a package of possible policy measures, which is not, of course, something totally new, because we have been living crisis after crisis, and in particular, the 2008-2009 crisis gave us a lot of knowledge and on what can work and what can't work. And very pleased that both Minister Jennifer Baptiste and also Minister Vance Harmony have highlighted some of the measures that are needed or that have been taken so far, including stimulation of the economy, having labor, and of course support to vulnerable people, support in employment as part of the stimulus measures, supporting to enterprises, to jobs, and to incomes through extension of social protection and measures to retain employment, and also some relief for small and micro enterprises and for all enterprises at all. Measures directed to protect workers in the workplace, including occupational safety and health. And there'll be a war before COVID and after COVID when you talk about safety and security at the workplace, because the workplace is a place of contagion, but also a place of prevention. Health access, I mean, I think after that, it is unimaginable to have a world without health for all. That's the minimum we could get out of this pandemic. Adapt the work arrangements with new modalities, including telework, regulated telework, and of course, measures directed to prevent discrimination. And finally, the importance of social dialogue. I think this is quite crucial, because we are talking about a new agreement, new contracts that have to be made under different circumstances. And for these agreements to work and to have long-term sustainability, they have to be negotiated, they have to be validated by those affected. So social dialogue is also most relevant than ever. And it's interesting because we have just finished our IOC in 2019, commemorating our 100 years and projecting ourselves in the future of work. And now here we are, exactly in the future of work, and we were kind of forced in the future of work. And we realized that our tools and our instruments, in our way, our values, including our standards, are more valuable than ever. It was very nice to listen to this debate, in particular the positive outlook. Because of course there's a lot of bad things going on. There's a lot of words associated with the pandemic, of course, deaths and the earthquakes. Everybody's comparing the pandemic to an ugly thing. And here we see our partners looking at the opportunities that might arise. And so this is the moment to think online, as Minister Amory said. If you haven't migrated towards, invested in skills, as Mr. Chen also highlighted, to jump into the online world, that's the moment. So in particular in economies that are heavily intense in service, this is the moment to get into the service provision online and acquire capabilities and skills to do so. So that's perhaps one of the things that we should be doing heavily for the post-COVID. The second thing is, of course, there'll be, the most valuable asset after everything passed, or at least in the transition to a new COVID world, it will be a healthy worker. Yeah? Could you imagine a healthy worker protected with all the equipment and also tested? So that's perhaps going to be one of the most valuable things one could have, both a company or an enterprise. So this is the moment to invest in protection. In particular, in small island development space, states, that means heavily investment on testing and also on protection to close down, to avoid infection, and also track those who are infected, of course, take the necessary measures in order to protect the healthy workforce. And I'm sure this is going to be the main driven of investment in the future, and also tourism. If you promise me that you have a COVID-free resort somewhere, I'm the first one to appoint myself after more than a month shut down in an apartment, So these are the opportunities that might arise, but then you need to be very proactive. Of course, the sanitary and the health protection measures are crucial, and security, and safety and security in the workplace, and occupational health will have another dimension in this new world, new post-COVID world. And the other thing that I'd like to highlight is, as well, is there's a lot of course, guessing, and the situation is a lot of volatility. And so from one day to other, we float from millions of cases to thousands of cases, the projections about the world. So we need to be cautious as well, that we are navigating and like an uncertainty, through an uncertainty times, and there's the science and the predictions are kind of very volatile. So we need to be prepared, for the worst, of course, but have in mind what the opportunities that we have. So Claudia, that's it on my side. I just say that ILO, of course, we are all on teleworking since 16, in the case of Lima, since 16 March, and we don't know yet when you go back, we'll come back, but we are at your disposal. Now we are fully operational. We are working with a number of countries, and you'll be ready to support you with whatever way you want. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pinheiro, for your comments and your remarks. What I will do now, we have actually 10 minutes left, and we have received a lot of questions, which I'm not going to raise all individually, but what I thought could maybe be the best way to approach this is I have clustered, with the help of my colleagues, the types of questions that we have, and I will just raise them all at once, and then we'll bring it back to each of you for 1-2 minutes of reflections on the questions that where you feel your response is the most appropriate. There is a very large amount of questions specifically related to the protection of workers, how to regulate and monitor compliance of regulations with workers, and some specific examples were raised. For example, caregivers who are being forced to live in without receiving additional compensation. Another case on workers was related to poultry farms, where workers insist on social distancing, but the employers do not want to accept it, and what kind of recourse do the workers then have? Another question related to the protection of workers was very much related to teleworking, how to ensure occupational insurance, but also addressing occupational risks for workers who go on telework. And also related still to protection of workers was the issue of migrant workers. In many cases, the schemes that have been launched are very directly applicable to workers, to national workers, and often we see that migrant workers are falling through the cracks. So what have been some approaches, or what are some reflections related to both documented and undocumented migrant workers? That is the chapter of working conditions, and I would like to invite all the panelists maybe to share some very quick thoughts on that. I want to, at the same time, because we will not have the time to have 2 rounds, I want to also bring up another set of questions that was raised, which is very much more looking at the opportunities that this crisis is also bringing along. We had one specific question that was raising whether CARICOM has considered corporate incentives to support manufacturing, such as recycling, in order to reduce dependency on imports. There were other questions related to what are thoughts on higher education institutions and the role of higher education institutions in resetting the economies. We had another question related to the digitization of our economies, which is presenting a lot of opportunities, and several of you have alluded to that. But the question was raised, how ready are we and what can be done to accelerate preparedness? So there are much questions related to what do we do to protect workers in specific circumstances, and on the other hand, what would we, how do we tap the opportunities, and what role can our social partners play to take that forward? I would like to invite all of you, not to put any person on the spot, but maybe just to reflect on some of those issues which are clearly very much alive among our audience. And so I would like to start with our first speaker. We maybe take the same order as we had. 1, 2, maybe maximum 3 minutes for you to give your final thoughts, specifically around the questions that were raised. Honorable Minister Vance Amori, if you can unmute your mic and give us your responses.
I think I've unmuted it. In respect to
you have. Yeah.
Protection of workers, I think it is a critical part of what we in the ministries of labor and governments and our tripartite partners must pay attention to. And that has been one of the main focus points of looking at this COVID-19. We have paid specific attention to the health, and in every decision which has been made, the health of the people, health of workers, distancing has been priority for the government to consider any request for persons being asked to work. Now, I'll say we've had the manufacturing, and some of the manufacturers have asked for workers to be allowed to work during this period. And the first thing which we've done is that we have set out, with the help of our medical experts and the representatives of our labor departments in safety and health issues, to go to the places of work to ensure that, 1, there's proper sanitization, there are proper facilities, that distancing has been established, and that the employers, the manufacturers are convinced and are part of the decision to make sure that the health of the workers comes first. And I use myself in talking to one of my permanent secretaries, the issue that Mr. Lewis raised, and that is we must put our people before profit and the health of our people before wealth. That is something which I instructed them to look at. So we are very much supportive of making sure that the health issues are paramount to protect our workers. Those in the front line, certainly protective equipment is essential, and these are things which have been identified and which have been put forward as part of our policy and decision before persons are allowed to be engaged in any activity in respect of this war in the COVID pandemic. Thank you very much, Cornelius.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you very much. Minister Baptiste Primus, I hand over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Claudia. We have found ourselves as a people, as a race, the human race. We have found ourselves in a situation that at the present time, it is constantly evolving. When this COVID-19 virus first turned up, some of the measures that were implemented have been improved. I mean, we are all now wearing masks. The entire world of people are wearing masks. Our governments are working to identify solutions. And in that context, I would want to state that our Honorable Prime Minister has really led from in front on this crisis in Trinidad and Tobago, and took hard decisions that are necessary for the preservation of life. This is what we are dealing with, the preservation of life. And one must recognize that in doing so, there will be sacrifices that all of us who are citizens of our respective countries, there are certain sacrifices that all of us must make. They're by and large in Trinidad and Tobago, the Honorable Prime Minister has been able to influence the citizenry to engage in social distancing, to wear our mask once we go out into the public. Only essential workers are out to work. And in that context, I would like to seize the opportunity to thank our local frontline workers, our nursing personnel, our doctors, the entire sector. I mean, you have our garbage men, those persons who work in the groceries, those persons who sell in the market, because if it is not for these persons, we would have had many, many more challenges. We are experiencing some challenges with a small minority of citizens in Trinidad and Tobago who have refused to pay attention to the seriousness of this highly contagious virus that is a respecter of no one. It does not respect class, nor race, nor religion. It has created a literal war with the human race, and it is an invisible enemy. I mean, when we are fighting each other as human beings, we can see our targets, but in this regard, it is an invisible enemy that is a respecter of no one. And therefore, it is within that context that we are very happy for the ILO to have arranged this discussion across the broad breadth of the Caribbean that has international flavor to it. If we work together, and I want to agree with my colleague from the Caribbean Congress of Labor, we have to work together if we are to get through this, because we are all in this together. Against that background, Trinidad and Tobago wishes to once more to thank the ILO for being the initiator of this very needed and important discourse this morning.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister Jennifer Baptiste Primus. We appreciate your response. I'd like to also give the opportunity for some final remarks from Mr. Chen, and after that, Mr. Lewis and Mr. Pinheiro, before I kind of do some closing words.
Thank you, Claudia. Every government in the region is now faced with a dilemma. And
Mr. Chen, we cannot hear you.
In the region is now how to balance the health and safety of its citizens, all its citizens, with the health of the economy. Because every country in the region, yes, is faced with the dilemma of how to balance the health and safety of individuals, all its citizens, with the health and safety of the economy. One of the mistakes that is often made, and it happens in the dialogue, is that the economy is not just a bunch of numbers. It's not just GDP as a number. It is the economic activity of individuals. It is the jobs. It is the money generated within the society. It is the money that government need to provide healthcare, to provide education, to build infrastructure. And the fact is that while we protect the citizens against the invisible virus, we also have to be mindful that economic activity has to restart and restart soon. Economic activity centers around businesses. Businesses need to get back up to speed and to be profitable. Otherwise, there is no job and there's nothing to pay back in taxes. So this balancing act has to be very delicately managed going forward. We also have to be mindful that some of our countries have recently come out of a debt trap. St. Kitts has come out of a debt trap. Jamaica has been making tremendous progress in getting out of a debt trap. Belize has been in a debt trap and is making progress. Barbados is in a debt trap. So we also have to understand that these are not just numbers. These are things that have serious implications for the delivery of service and the welfare of citizens. So there is a balancing act that has to be that we have to be mindful of going forward. But while we have those challenges, we also have the opportunities. People are at home. People are receiving whether some form of welfare from the state. We have activities, we have programs, we have initiatives that have long been spoken about. The digital transformation of our economies, the upskilling and reskilling of our workforces, the improvement of the educational standards of all our people. These are issues that now that we have some reflective time, that we can start to see how we can use the digital tools. How can we use the idle time while we wait for the hospitality sector, for argument's sake, to come back. There's talk of food independence and economic resilience, but it cannot be going back to the agriculture of old. How can we use modern methods of agriculture to make agriculture not just productive, but affordable? We rely on cheap imports for the precise reason that it's cheap. To eat healthy is expensive, and many of our citizens would love to eat healthy. But when you hear that an avocado, and Minister Primus is there, I just heard yesterday that an avocado in Trinidad costs about $25 Trinidadian dollars. That is $4 US for a simple avocado. Why isn't Trinidad producing avocados that can sell for 50 cents TT, which it would in Mexico? So we have to look at how do we use new knowledge gained to apply brain power to other sectors of the economy to build resilience, to build food independence. And so I think it should be a time of reflection, but it should also be a time for a reset. And my last word is social dialogue will be essential in moving this process forward. But not just formalize social dialogue in a way that we have even talked about before, but something more meaningful where we are not just consulted after the fact, but where we actually have an input into decision making, and not just asked to build stakeholder acceptance, but we build stakeholder acceptance because we're part of the process. That is my takeaway.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chen. That was a very good way of summing up. Mr. Lewis?
Thank you very much. And just want to end by repeating that the health and safety of people, workers, comes first. We want to make a bold suggestion. We are confident that if we all accept, as we appear to, and not just the panelists on this program, but the other leaders, be it business, governments, etc., that this pandemic is wreaking havoc and we need to put humanity first. Let us remember for one brief moment that the Caribbean region, the financial institutions had all found themselves in a high liquidity issue where they had too much money to put locally. What that means is that there are funds outside there. There are funds outside there that can be utilized in this period through the dialogue process, as we have seen, to be able to assist the poor and marginalized. If this thing is not managed properly, there can be serious social ills that may have serious implications for us. The question of crimes, drugs, etc. will be there. But the labor movement, as we have indicated, is very much concerned about even the unemployed and the workers who are not unionized. And here, together with the labor movement, the Ministry of Labor, there needs to be stepped up vigilance in looking after the interests and protection of these workers. We have had cases where in the region, workers in some of the ununionized workplaces, fearing loss of their jobs, went to work under exposed situations and conditions and have contracted COVID-19. When they contract COVID-19, it will spread throughout our community. So we have that responsibility. And we say no pain, no gain, meaning that as workers, we are prepared to make the sacrifices, but we have to be able to take care of our immediate needs. And that is why in this context, we want to make that request that at least for the next 3 months, in the first instance, varying degrees, that during the period of what you call a lockdown, the 24-hour curfew, wherever that may be, that these leave do not impact on people's annual vacation leave, etc. And I'll tell you the reason for it. We must be aware that the lockdown, while we are locked down 24 hours a day and you cannot go outside, it is different to when you willingly stay at home. There's stress, there's psychological stress. And at some stage, we are absolutely confident in the labor movement that we're going to rise from this. The region going to rise from this. We're going to rise from this. That we need to be able to have some means that our workers at the appropriate time can get, together with the wider community, a better breathing space. So we want to, once again, calls for people before profit. And our hats off to the Minister of Labor from St. Kitts and Nevis. It is a very good mantra, and we want to make that request of our ministers directly. We know we have called on the ILO, but of our ministers to make that call to your other colleagues throughout the region, people before profit, and we are all in this together. And regardless of what we do, we must protect our people. I want to wish everyone all the best. Stay safe and stay healthy. Follow the advice of our medical professionals. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Pinheiro, I thought maybe you have some further, quick reflections on some of the questions that were raised, especially with regard to either, the working conditions, how do we protect workers, but also very much into how do we actually tap the opportunities that are also there.
Yes, I just have like three final remarks, Claudia. The first one is we shouldn't get into this trap of the economy between the saving lives or saving the economy, or the economy between the health and the wealth, because we don't have economy without people, and we are not going to produce wealth if people are not healthy, And as I said in the beginning, in the post-COVID world, one of the most valuable assets for society, for companies, for governments will be a healthy worker. So we need to invest heavily on that. And if you open up and you bring someone that is unfortunately is infected to a plant with 10, 12 people, have to shut it down the next day. if you don't take the necessary measures in terms of protective equipment or in terms of respecting quarantines and respecting whatever regulations are in place, the price that is paid afterwards is much higher than the price of prevention. So there's not such a dichotomy, and we should avoid getting to this kind of political trap. This is a very pragmatic approach that has to be taken. So it's important to keep the machine working. So we need to find ways to do it. We need to invest heavily in safety and health, and we need to actually value those who are in the front lines. I think this is what the minister said is very important. I mean, healthcare workers, garbage workers, those who are in the security forces. It's interesting to recognize them with words, but now perhaps it's a moment as well to think about working conditions for these groups and also about salaries. Now we live in a world that doesn't, in particular this moment, equal pay for work of equal value is not really being applied, so this is the moment perhaps to reflect, not only in terms of stepping up working conditions, but also recognizing in terms of increases in salaries. And let me just finish by highlighting a word, which you in the Caribbean are very used to, which is the word resilience, because I think this is the critical word for this moment we're living. Many say that contrary to the economic crisis of 28, 29, in which it took like 10 years to come back to similar employment levels, this crisis is like the passage of a hurricane or earthquake or a natural disaster. So we go deep down, and it's going to be a lot of problems and a lot of issues to be solved. But then if you manage to keep the social tissue, the economic links together, or at least to avoid damage, we are able to re-emerge quickly. So it's a kind of V-shaped recovery. So you go down, and then of course, okay, everything's passed. Now we can reconnect and keep the machine working again, and of course learn lessons and see what we can do differently, and then to avoid the next pandemic. So, and you in the Caribbean, you're the champions of resilience, and you have a lot to teach us. So be looking very carefully what you're doing, okay, and hopefully to learn some lessons, and hopefully we emerge from this crisis safe, in good shape, and healthy, and ready for engaging with the world, with the nature, in a better terms. And the recycling industry, I think someone mentioned that, is such an important issue that has to be taken into consideration, in particular in the context of breaking supply chains. And some of the supply chains have been broken, and it's going to be difficult to restore. So we should be looking at the green economy, the recycling industry, as one of the conditions to re-emerge in the post-world COVID. Same way that we think about a world that, everybody should have access to healthcare, we should think about re-emerging a world that's greener, that is more sustainable as well. So thank you so much for this dialogue. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And we are strictly speaking 10 minutes over time. I might take another 1 or 2 minutes to, as I wrap up, just make three very quick points. The first one, even though I think our panelists in their final remarks have already kind of alluded to quite a few of them, but I really take away six really, and I won't elaborate on them, I'll just be very brief, but 6 key messages. I think the first one is that we are witnessing a great disruption of labor markets. So the impact is enormous and is shown on short, medium, and long term. So we are in it for the long haul. I think the second message is that there are different categories of workers who are going to be most affected, and it is going to be very important to make sure that we think about them and that we incorporate them in our measures. The third is that employers too are really in survival mode, and that in many ways this is bringing us back to our existing challenges related to diversification of economy, how do we make the best use of education, and so on. The fourth message is very much related to the importance of the human face, the working conditions, and especially the working conditions that we need to look at in the changing working environment. health and safety being very important. The fifth one, which I really want to emphasize, and I think it was you, Wayne, who brought it back several times, but I think it is so important. It is important to continue to look at opportunities, to really see and take the disruption as, you know, something that can move us further. And I was very happy, Mr. Pinheiro, that you were talking about resilience, because I think that is very much, it's also the theme under which we are organizing this series of webinars, which is resilient with decent work. Very importantly, we need to really look at how we use resilience to really identify opportunities and to build better, and to address some of the challenges that have been there for a long time. And then the last one, but maybe the most important one, is that none of these will be possible without social dialogue. Most of the countries in the Caribbean have some level of existing mechanisms that are tripartite. We would very much encourage these to be used, and probably they will have to be used at a much accelerated and intensified level if we are to really come to those big answers of how we want our society and our countries to emerge from this better. So that is my few takeaways. I wanted to also mention to all the participants, and I'd like to thank you all very much for being with us for 1.5 hours of a very interesting, insightful discussion. And for all the questions that you have raised. And I do realize that you did not necessarily get answers to your very specific questions. I want to reiterate, as I said in the beginning, that if there are specific questions on which you want to pursue an answer, please send us an email and we will see whether it can be either the ILO addressing it or whether we can refer you further. And then lastly, a very big thank you to all the panel members. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your thoughts, for your inputs. It was a very insightful, and we received a lot of very important and interesting reflections and points. I think the important thing is to know that we are all in this together. It is very important that the Caribbean comes together in this very difficult time. And as the ILO office in the Caribbean, we will do our utmost to be of service, to see how we can support and be a convener for all of the important players to help establish and construct the solutions that will take us forward. So with that, thank you very much, and I wish you all a wonderful rest of the day, and stay safe, stay healthy. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Bye, everyone. Be safe.